forge your inner armor. Welcome to the Inner Armor Podcast with Dr. Timothy Royer, where we explore ways to train our brains and bodies to become dynamically resilient so that we can all, from professional athletes to ordinary people, perform at our potential. Well, we have another very special episode today because this week Doc is visiting Liberty University, where Inner Armor works with student athletes, both men and women, in every sport. And today we have Neil Binette, who oversees mental health and performance services for student athletes at Liberty. Neil has a master's in counseling from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and is just now completing his PhD at Antioch University. Neil, welcome to the Inner Armor Podcast.
Thank you. It's a privilege.
Good to have you here, Neil.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, Doc has told me a lot about you, all great. And in particularly went on and on about not only how bright you are, but how data-driven your approach is and how you like to use data to sort of innovate new approaches to solving problems and seizing opportunities. So I'm really excited about our conversation today and to hear your thoughts on the challenges and the opportunities of working with collegiate athletes. So Doc, do you want to talk about how you met Neil and how you began working together?
Yeah. If our listeners listen to the other podcasts with Chris Casola, that was much earlier in our development. Like I said, we were kind of in this neuropsych silo of doing some testing for student athletes with previous diagnoses. But as we started to scale more and started to get more data in that would give us a more complete picture of the athlete, Neil and I started to interact. And I think one of the stories I remember about Neil was that we had started just dipping our toes in the vision therapy piece, right? And I'm looking over the data. I'm like, who is this person that's running so many vision sessions? So I'm like looking through all my student lists, like what student is this? You know, this Neil Binette. And I'm like, that's Neil who I met that's up in the Cal. Is he doing the program? And I don't think I've seen somebody work so hard. Do you remember when you were doing that, Neil?
Oh, yeah. Mine capped out at 100 sessions. Now you're in sessions. I'm like, Doctor, need more. Come on.
I mean, he's not just like, yeah, it's good for the, students to be doing that, which you see a lot, is like people, hey, it's good for the kids, but not for me. And Neil was all in, and it was amazing to actually watch your progress, Neil.
Well, I have to tell you, so I never retested myself after doing all those sessions. I just retested myself 2 months ago, right? And that was 2 years ago I did the program, and the changes that were made were pretty significant.
Wow.
And it held 2 years later, because that was kind of my question. Like, is this actually does it help somebody just for the moment? Does this fade over time? And I was like, oh my gosh, I've seen improvement, and it clearly has held on after 2 years.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So when I talk about Neil, the data, and I mean, this guy walks the talk, and it's really interesting because being in the field of psychology, for my entire life, there's sometimes that people can kind of get sequestered into their office and their silo. And this is the way I've always done it. This works. And not saying that it doesn't work, but Neil's always looking for, well, if my goal is to make this person stronger, what other resources can I leverage? And that is a very unique trait to have as a therapist or a psychologist to be like, hey, let me look at this differently. And that's why we've had such good synergy together. It's been exciting to just to see where Neil's going next with how are we going to use the information. So.
Well, and it's funny. I won't share too much of my backstory. It's probably a story for a different day, but a lot of my experiences have led to this kind of a passion or understanding of psychology to say, I don't want to just, do coffee shop therapy, sit in an office and just have a conversation with somebody and be their professional friend, right? I mean, I felt like counseling needed to be a lot more than that. And I think sometimes we can lower the standard because it's such an abstract field, right? If people feel good when they leave, then I've done my job, right? But I want to have measurable goals and outcomes to say, it's great. I want to be your friend, but at the same time, I also want you to progress and move on. And especially in a performance-based field like this, we only have small windows of opportunity to develop our craft and get good at it. And in the same way, I view psychology where, I want to be good at what I do and I want to be conversational and relational, but I also want to get better. I want to have goals. I want to be achieving new heights all the time. And I want to know where that ceiling is and see if I can push beyond it. Right. So, my passion has been a little bit competitive that way. I think that's why, I enjoy, this environment so much, but also, we should always be growing and evolving anyways. Right. And I do believe that there's something innate in us that wants to always grow and learn and progress and move on from another previous state. And we should be growing towards something all the time. So, it was really interesting, meeting you, Tim, where I really appreciated that. So you have to know this about, at least my bias as a therapist, right? Where you have the evaluator come in just to give someone academic accommodations and no one's reading the report.
No.
And so what I was excited about, right, is, okay, you just give me the accommodations, tell me what we need to do for this athlete, and we'll just, give them external tests in the front of the classroom. And let's be honest, there was nothing that was saying you can get better at this. The medical model will often say, oh, you just need to deal with your shortcomings. And as athletes, that's not okay, right? I mean, we always have to be finding new ways to push ourselves beyond our own self-defined limits. And one of the things I really appreciated about Inner Armor, I was super excited because you weren't saying, let's just accept our weaknesses and just try to find ways to increase our strengths and just, try to deal with. You were saying, no, we have some interventions that you can practice that will actually help you be better. Right. And so that's why I did all 99 sessions and was wanting more, right? Because, we all have this drive in us to be better. And somewhere along the line, we learn, oh, you're just not going to get better. You have to accept that that's the way things are. And I think very naturally, you're in my connection, we were seeing things the same way, right? Is that this profession doesn't need to be an acceptance of the negative. Yes, it should be. I think we need to learn to tolerate very difficult circumstances that happen in our lives and find a way to accept those things. But you were saying, no, I can actually help people improve their rate of processing information. And so that really kind of stuck with me because our field of psychology is a processing-oriented, insight-oriented field where we're growing and learning about ourselves and about the world around us and how we interact with that world. And if we can shift that by something as simple as I can spend 5 minutes doing a vision exercise, helps me process information better. Yeah, we bring that on, right? I mean, we spend 5 minutes doing a lot of things throughout our day and they're not always good.
Yeah.
Wow.
Awesome.
So, Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, but student athletes today face some unique pressures that they might not have in previous generations. So, we're looking at these athletes, they would be between 18 and 22 years old approximately, which means they were all born around the turn of the 21st century. And this is what the demographers called Generation Z, or the Zoomers, right? So they were pretty much all born after 9/11. They've never known a time when they didn't have immersive access to the web and all that entails in so many ways. Smartphones came out when they were toddlers or even after they were born. So they've had the web in their hands probably before they could ride a bike. They've grown up during years of what would you call the last 15 years, cultural and political upheaval. And the sort of rapid transformation or perhaps meltdown, depending on your perspective, of values, worldviews, and religion in our culture that have taken place over this last decade or couple decades. In a lot of ways, they literally grew up in a very different world than the one that the three of us grew up in. So now they come to college with all that entails for any student, but they have the added pressures and the privileges of being athletes and having to perform in their sport. So with that kind of elaborate setup, how does this generation of student athletes differ from previous generations? And maybe what do they bring to the table, but also what do they need? Because I'm assuming that, your goal isn't just to help them perform better on the field or in the court and the pool. Your goal is to help them become healthy human beings on and off the field and for the rest of their lives. So, okay, that's a big wind up, but take it from there.
Let me just start by saying, that holistic view of the athlete, that 360 view is exactly what we at least have for a goal here. And again, part of why I love what we're doing, even with the Inner Armor program, is this one more facet that we can add to that 360 view of the athlete. And so you're right. And this generation, there's some really exciting things that they're doing that, we could have only dreamed of being able to do. And it's something they've grown up with. And I think in that way, it's very exciting. But anytime we create any kind of change or shift away from what was the norm, it's also going to have with it some side effects, some drawbacks too. And so I think there's a lot to be excited about and a lot to also be cautious about, right? I mean, just even you mentioned the information boom, right? Having Google at your fingertips. What an exciting opportunity is you have access to any and all information that anybody could have, information and misinformation, right? So, being able to filter out what that, information means for the individual, it also makes it really highly subjective. But what we have now is a generation that is far brighter, far smarter, far faster than what we could have ever have dreamed of. And that's very exciting in a lot of ways. So what it has done is it's certainly increased pressures, but it's also increased a certain precision, right? There's a certain exactness and a certain, detail and truth that this generation really craves and hungers for. And so what I see as the side effect, and I think, we'll probably talk about this more throughout the course of this discussion, is that what this current generation is also craving and hungering for is more interpersonal contact, because that part has been missing. And again, I wouldn't say it's wholly bad, because now we have this access to information, but now this generation is trying to find ways to read into certain cues, and it's driving a certain amount of overthinking or isolation. On either end of the spectrum is I'm over invested trying to read into, and it's creating all kinds of cognitive distortions. Or on the converse, I'm super isolated and distracted and scrolling through my phones and just looking at someone's pictures, and we create this fantasy world of what life can or should be and how I don't compare. Right. And so I see our athletes also struggle in a very similar way, where there's almost this fantasy world of what they have to put out there, of who they are and what they look like. And we're lacking authenticity and even truth of who we are. So when you look at the identity challenge of what that creates is, I have to put forward this image of who I think I'm supposed to be, what people want me to be. And now I lose that sense of self. Who am I actually? And that means the warts and all, right? Like there's some things about me that maybe I try to hide and I can hide behind in social media, but I have to come to grips with who I am, both the good and the bad. And I think we're starting to lose that. And now what I see in this current generation is a certain hunger and thirst for, no, give it to me straight. This is the generation of everyone gets a participation award. And let's be honest, the reality of that is we're creating, in one sense, information gurus, but in another sense, low resilience to anxiety, depression, all these things, pressures, even performance on the field. You see athletes that are crumbling at the first, sign of criticism. And then now we want to bubble wrap everybody and protect them. Everybody gets a participation award. And I think in one sense, it's really, really good. But in another sense, we have to course correct a little bit.
In the last couple of years, as I, sent my kids off to college, whatnot, and did those visits, I was struck with how different the campus is from way back in ancient times when I went there, when the world was still in black and white, everything.
Sure.
But, right, it felt like, now I'm going to say something that probably comes off a little bit pejorative, but it felt like summer camp. It was really elaborate. So, and I'm not saying that's bad by all means, but can you talk a little bit about this time in life and how higher ed treats these students and sort of the, maybe the pluses and minuses of some of that?
Sure. Yeah. There's some things I do love about it. And again, I'm trying to look at this from both angles to say, there's some really good and some things that we're probably going to see as a negative effect, later on. There's a lot of good. And, what I like seeing is that we're making this shift towards, more critical thinking, right? Because I don't have to memorize all kinds of information and regurgitate any of the information, because all I have to do is Google it and have that access within seconds, right? I can have a full dissertation of what someone's written on any given topic and have it in no time. So we need a generation of thinkers that can think beyond just the information.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the transfer of knowledge, right? Is it's, okay, I can read a book about how to run a chainsaw. Until I have a chainsaw in my hands, I don't actually know how to run a chainsaw. Right. So we've got this group of youngsters now coming up. I mean, I'm sounding old here saying that, but this young generation here that has all the knowledge that they could want and more than they can handle and deal with. And then they're not taught how to use it in a constructive sort of a way. And so I think we're missing that transfer of knowledge into wisdom. So people are hungry then for, okay, so you can tell me all these things and I'm going to be skeptical and critical of the information, but then I don't know how to use it. And so now we're stuck in this void of a lack of critical thinking. And I think that's what we're seeing when it's lowered motivation in the workforce, or we're seeing that, I go on all day long, right? About, back in my day, things were different. And we don't have to go there because there's some really good, but we're also seeing then the consequence of what we've created by having so much access to information. And again, we're talking about inner armor, right? Is we're looking at information processing. And so we need a generation that can handle the massive amounts of information that they're taking in. But then what do you do with that? Right? You're stuck in overthinking, or you go into shutdown and in isolation because I can't handle the constant barrage of information. And so what we're seeking and hungry for is interpersonal connection. And again, I think why we're seeing so much need for therapy is because people are hungry for, I need to process, I need to talk this through. I need alternative perspectives. I'm stuck in myself all day long. Right. And that's not good for us, because then it leads us to this hypercritical, the stuff that we're going through as a society right now, where it's cancel culture and all this stuff. It's good that we're looking at this and saying, okay, give me the information, but then what do I do with it? Because I can't handle it, because I can't process information that fast.
Doc, back when you were doing your doctorate in family systems, and then in your clinical work with children and children's neuropsych on through adolescence, and then how your career progressed, you've got 30 something years of sort of perspective on development of young people into adolescence, into student athletes.
I mean, there's things that are different and there's things that are similar. I think time is always the thing, is, where are we getting time? And that, 30 years ago was still an issue as it is now. There's a lot more things that are pulling at our time. The ability to watch whatever I want for as long as I want, and as many episodes as I want, and as many seasons as I want. We start to lose time that has to go someplace. And if we were looking at time as cash, maybe we would all be a little bit different with that. But in doing so, I think people are using that many times to deal with different emotions and different things that are going on. There's a tendency to have less structure. We see that, I think, in different styles of parenting, where you'll see that it's kind of looked at negatively to be putting limits and boundaries on kids, but kids really need limits and boundaries because they're trying to develop themselves. And so that's a different podcast. But the necessity for structure, routine, being present is huge. It's so hard to find the space and time to be present, because there's so many things that are pulling at us to distract us. And just think about the last conversation you had with somebody that was really meaningful. They were probably not looking at Instagram. They probably weren't, rushing out to the next meeting. They were just sitting there talking to you, over the dinner, or the glass of wine or whatever it was. You're just chatting, right? And you're being present. And there's nothing that will replace relationships. You just can't. It's not going to happen. We are relational beings, and our lives are just a series of relationships. So I think some of these things can enhance, but I think they can also compromise real relationships, and disconnecting from the knowledge that could be at you every second is hard to do now.
Neil, when we look at collegiate athletes, so often they're put on a pedestal, right? I mean, they're idealized, they're idols. We watch them on TV, national championships, and fans buy their shirts and hats of the school, right? Boosters donate money. I mean, collegiate athletics is a huge multi-bazillion dollar industry, right? These students athletes are in the prime of their life, physically, mentally, the 20, 21-year-old with everything going for them. And we love to watch them perform, right? But they're also human beings. They're not just performers. So how do you work? How does Liberty work to avoid allowing them to become idols or just performers? How do you work to preserve and develop their humanity during just this very brief window that they're on this stage, between 18 and 22 years old?
Yeah. And again, part of why I love Liberty so much is certainly the resources are available to our student athletes, but there's also something qualitatively different, right? We're invested in relationship here. And when you hear that term, training champions for Christ, it certainly can get misconstrued in many ways, but I see how much dedication goes into building relationships with one another and modeling that Christ-like attitude look at that was the mission of Christ anyways. It came down to enter into our humanity, right? And so when I think about what we're doing here in a holistic sort of way, where we're kind of embracing that thought of entering in with one another. And so, Doc, talking about presence, I think that's right on. We crave authentic connection. And what I see, at least ideologically, we don't always, get this 100%, but I would say we're on the right track of really trying to develop quality of relationship. And so whether that's in academics and, in the team up there, and they're doing a great job to ask a student athlete how they're doing, get to know them on a personal level, understand their life and what kinds of life circumstances might be influencing their current health and well-being. We have a whole section to, these athletic shepherds we have. What a great job that they do to just develop and grow relationships with our student athletes. And then even the counseling services that we offer here. And again, we go beyond just mental health counseling. When you see the depth and breadth of mental health promotion that we're trying to accomplish here, we have a lot of resources available, not because athletes need to use all the resources, but they can use the resources that are available to them that they need in that moment, whether it's they need to come to counseling, or maybe they need to do some vision training, or maybe we need to do some further assessment and better understand, the individual, their data, their information, so that they know themselves better. Now, there's just such a this holistic approach of understanding the individual, where I can go downstairs and talk to the doc about medication management, or talk to a nutritionist about fueling properly, or talk to our strength coaches about overuse or different things that are going on for an athlete potentially, that we're able to meet the individual where they are, because we're taking this holistic approach, not just to look at the team as a whole and this person doesn't fit into the team, but how do we help each individual plug in and find a role, in how their role can contribute very specifically and meaningfully in their own way, right? We have 26 individuals on a team that they all contribute in very significant and very different ways. And we're promoting belonging. We're promoting all these things that we need on an emotional level to say, this is what we offer as a service. But also, we're trying to find a way to develop the individual and help them be the best that they can be on or off the field for a lifetime, not just this small window of 4 years where they're here and they're being asked to perform at some high level. And I believe that helps build the resilience that they need to perform at that high level. And when you talk about being idolized and all these things, that our human condition, we're not conditioned to take on that type of theme. We're built for interpersonal connection. So we believe fundamentally that if we help the individual be connected and know themselves, as well as develop relationships with one another, with their teammates or coaches, their athletic shepherd, their teachers, whoever it is, we are trying really hard to help the individual develop quality of interaction, not just quality of performance. Because we believe that when someone has that safe base, that emotional needs are getting met, they're going to be more confident. Self-efficacy is going to be at its highest. More confident athletes are going to perform better, right? And they can withstand the criticism and the critique, and they can handle direct feedback, and they can be resilient, and they can handle, a game where they underperform and bounce back.
Doc, with your background in systems theory, speak to the issue of how the team functions and how, from a family systems standpoint, the team interacts, but also not just the players, but the coaches, the staff, all the people like Neil and others. It's a totality of a system. And you've seen this not only, of course, in the collegiate setting, but also in the professional team. So we've talked before about what it takes for a team at a professional level to succeed, not only with the players, but with the staff and the administration and so forth. Can you give us some insight?
There's a couple unique things that we do here that LU Liberty has embraced, and that helps a lot with that, which is, I don't think it's done very many other places, but we have all the student athletes do this behavioral assessment. It's probably the gold standard. It's been around for 50 years. I think there's over 12,000 studies done with this behavioral assessment, very widely used, called the Adult Self-Report. And they go through and they answer 113 different things about themselves behaviorally and emotionally. And this creates a picture for us around 12 to 15 different variables that we can rank that can either be clinical or within normative ranges. And we've always used that. I've used that in my career for the last, 30 years. But here at Liberty, what we do is we take that and we combine the whole team. So we know, because we have had created such a significant database here, we know what an average Liberty athlete looks like compared to 600 other athletes. So we have that many in the database. So yes, we know what clinical looks like compared to the normal population, but we know what the stressors and different things are going to be on the ASR. So we can compare to that database. Then we can take the whole team and see, where does the team fall as a unit, as a family, as a community on these different variables. So we might have one team that's a little bit more anxious than the other team. One team that has issues in the interpersonal side. Another team that may be a little bit more withdrawn and depressed. And this is a consistent theme, is rather than one size fits all, then we work with the shepherds and the trainers to say, this team has this particular need. And over the next 6 months, let's try to help them learn to develop some of these interpersonal skills. This team's a little bit more obsessive, anxious. Let's give them some more tools to address that. And so we see them as a system. They're part of a family. We also see them as individuals. And then I think on the intervention side, Neil's been kind of the impetus for this, is rather than us work in silos, Neil's like, hey, I want that stuff over here in the counseling area. Like, they don't just need to go to the resilience room. Before my sessions, I'm going to use this stuff and integrate the interventions across different platforms. And maybe that's something that you could speak to, Neil, like why you started to do that, what you started to notice, that integration of bringing the inner armor, like interface directly with the counseling, not just a separate place. But can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I probably should have said this back in the introduction, right? Part of, I think, why, you and I both, Doc, we were speaking the same language in a lot of ways, right? You from the psychologist side of things and the understanding the data and things like that. But I worked in environments where we did a lot of psych testing, and I really enjoyed being able to work with our evaluators to, okay, so what does this mean for that individual, right? So I already had a bit of a learning experience before this that really helped me understand these inner workings a little bit better and how to apply them, right? Because as a counselor, right, you can give me the data all day long and sure send me the recommendations, but I want to know how to apply this so I can affect individual change, right? So, even all the data that we have, I'm looking at this and saying, okay, so if I can empower an athlete with knowledge about themselves, about, hey, this is an area where I see, a potential effect that you're saying is not necessarily a healthy or good one for you. These are the things that we can do, whether it's information processing or even just calming and regulating your nervous system, or maybe, we're looking at performance issues around, hey, I'm getting winded, I shouldn't, my conditioning is, where it should be. And again, I'm not getting that granular, with the performance side of things, because I am looking more at the clinical side. But as I start to hear these things and things start to stand out to me, I say, hold on a second, tell me a little bit about your nervous system, how you're, coping, how you're dealing with these things. Let's set you up with some breathing exercises, because I think that'll help open up some bandwidth for you. And what I started to realize is that athletes that were practicing these very simple breathing and especially the breathing, right? If people are breathing before they come into session, they just have a better session, right? And so Buddhist monks have been talking about this for thousands of years, if I breathe right and I'm, mindful and I'm present and all these things, and, I just have a better quality of life. And it's like, okay, I can withstand difficult things that come my way. And I'm looking at that and saying, well, this isn't anything brand new. We can just measure that now, and we can measure it, and we can actually interact with our data to create improvement as opposed to it just being abstract. And so I think so often there are certain individuals that really struggle on the abstract side of things. If I can give them data that say, hey, we can measure this and take a look at how are you doing, with coherence and how you're getting into the zone or difficulty on the field. But also, how are you doing interpersonally? Like, you get dysregulated when you have a conversation, or when you get feedback from your coach, he sends you to a tailspin of overthinking, or, hey, having this problem, with your, your significant other, and connections is really lacking. So we can dive a little bit deeper and understand some different measurements of how is your nervous system? How are you doing information processing? What do the scores in your ASR say about what the problem areas look like? Because, I recently had a student athlete that said, oh yeah, I want to deal with anxiety. And we look at her ASR, I'm like, hang on a second, you call this anxiety, but what you're actually aiming on your ASR is actually depression, right? So can we have a little bit of conversation about what you mean around that? And so, and again, I won't talk about her specifics, but we're then able to more quickly interface with the actual problem that we're facing, that this student athlete is finding a barrier to their performance, to their academic performance, to their performance interpersonally in their relationships. And so now I've got data to back it up, and we have some information that, it helps me as the therapist both to say, hey, this is helping me get to know you better. And as I go through the assessments with them and they start to share, like, oh yeah, I've been having this difficulty with my short-term memory. I had one athlete look at me and she goes, that's why my parents always used to say, lights are on, but nobody's home. I was like, oh, wait a second, well, tell me more about that, right? And so now we're generating conversations around problem areas where someone's been stuck, and now they start to get unstuck, they get out of the mud, so to speak, and they get some traction now in their relationships.
Yeah. Oh, what an interface with. And that's what I appreciate so much, Neil, is your willingness to open up and say, what else can I provide in this therapy office? It's not just only Neil, in a sense. You're bringing these things in, the breathing, the neuropsych testing, the vision training. You're doing all that stuff, and you're reporting they're getting through faster. They're more present. They're more aware. You're having to do less fighting back defense mechanisms, and let's get to the heart of the problem, which is just such an innovative way to approach therapy. And I think we're seeing some really good traction with it.
Yeah, I can't speak enough good about what this has done, even for my own personal work, right? I mean, I very much believe in the need we all have to know and be known, right? And if we can get quicker to feeling known and to know one another better, there's going to be no ceiling.
Wow. So I'm going to throw this out to Neil, but Doc, you as well. I'm curious, as we kind of wind down here and kind of a 2-minute warning on our time, prognosticate a little bit for me. Where do you see collegiate athletics going in terms of the development of the student athletes? And where do you see these methodologies that you're using at Liberty? How are they going to continue to evolve? Where will it be in 5 years or 10 years?
Do you want to start, Doc?
Sure. I would say that I think if all we're doing is addressing downstream behaviors, emotions, thought processes, and we just stay there and just put more counseling offices, and make academics bigger. Not that they don't need more resources, but I don't think the answer is just to build more buildings and more offices and just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's how are we getting upstream? Okay. And the organizations or institutions that stay downstream, and every time the beach ball pops up in the pool, they push it back down again. And now we got 100 people in the pool pushing down the beach balls, right? But they keep popping up. But then you have an institution that says, wait a minute, let's go upstream and let's figure out what's going on here that's driving this and empowering the person to actually resolve their own problems, right? Like these institutions only have 4 or 5 years at most, but those resources aren't going to be there once they leave college, right? And so if it's like, oh, they can keep, use these things, with no discretion, they're just using them over and over, but yet we're not teaching them, no, you got to go fly. It's time to get your wings and go. It's like parenting in some ways is we have all the resources. We're providing the house, we're providing the food and those kind of things. But at some point you got to go do some of that stuff. And I think on the mental health side and on some of the resilience side, if the end game isn't resilience, then I don't think we've done our job. And there's going to be a distinction between institutions that just are doing more of the old same way to do it. And then the institutions like Liberty who are saying, no, we want to ask tough questions. How do we keep them out of this counseling center? Right? That's my take on it.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? So I would love to no longer have a job because counseling is no longer needed, right? And so, I'm like boldly saying that, the last thing I want to see is, my trade go away here. But you're right. We shouldn't be building dependence on therapists. We should be building a more resilient model to help people endure the difficulty that we inevitably face as human beings. And we're trying to train people to withstand that difficulty and be able to continue to progress in their lives. And again, this is not a deficit reduction model. This is about progress. How do I continue to grow and evolve in the course of my lifetime? Because I want to continue to exceed my own expectations for myself. And again, it's not to put the pressure on, because what I see here, right, is that in the athletic world, right, we're all talking about pressure. What I've noticed though is that as much as pressure increases, we have to also manage all of those emotional needs. And so you can continue to raise the bar if emotional needs are met. So, we're calling that resources and let's give more students more resources. No, let's equip them to be more resilient, to have their emotional needs met so they can withstand the pressures that they're under. Because this is about perceived pressure, right? Eustress versus distress. Like, okay, so why does, two people go into the same battle and one comes out with PTSD and the other doesn't, right? We have to be able to look at that and say, okay, how do we then help the individual grow and create protective factors in their life to then be more resilient so they can withstand the thing that they're coming up against, because that thing isn't going away, right? And so, and again, if we're talking about that in the world of athletics, pressure is going to increase. The higher you get in your ability level, the bigger the stage, the bigger the accolades, the bigger the notoriety that you get. And in order to withstand all that pressure, you have to have a relational model that helps balance that out and meets that emotional, relational need at the same time, because we're going to become really isolated and disconnected otherwise. We're going to be stuck in comparison, and we're going to be stuck in that, that model of social media that says everything is, perfect and wonderful in our lives. And we need a more genuine, authentic view, because we need to be allowed to make mistakes, because that's how we grow. If every team were perfect, we'd have a lot of boring games because there'd be no score.
We're going into March Madness here. and millions and millions and millions of people are going to sit on their couch and watch their favorite teams and watch the March Madness tournament and how exciting all that is. As we kind of wind down here, Neil, what would you want our listeners to know or maybe to remember when they're watching those student athletes perform? What would you want them to sort of bear in mind as they watch them on that stage?
Yeah, what it makes me think of is expectations, right? We don't want to lower expectations, but we also want realistic expectations, but we also want to agree to expectations. And so even as a passive participant in watching a game, right? Like I have these expectations, my team's going to win or so-and-so is going to be, a star performer. And we have to, reevaluate what we're putting out there as far as our own expectations of what we want to see from our favorite player or a team or our alma mater or whatever it is. And let's be more thoughtful about, we want to win, right? I mean, that's what we're all here for. And we want the loyalty and root for our team. But it goes beyond that, right? It goes to this place of morals and values of what is it that matters to me. And I want to see my team embody something I can really get behind, not just something I can criticize because that person missed that game-winning shot or the high-pressure situation, right? We want a mindset that's more driven by what we stand for, what we care about, what matters to us, than it is about any expectations that I place on somebody else to meet my needs for entertainment. And if a hard fought battle and, you see a good game where both teams fought hard and the best team won, they were more prepared, they were, better coached. That helps us raise the standard too, about to say, okay, next year we're going to learn and we're going to grow and we're going to rebuild and do the things we need to do if we lose. Or we can humbly win and say, no, we prepared, we worked hard and we gave it our all and we did everything we needed to do because we stood by some values that really matter to us. Right. When I see all these things that are going wrong, and we could look at the incident in UVA, last fall where some people unfortunately lost their lives to someone that had a gun. We need to look at the individuals and the expectations and pressures we're putting on them and start to teach a more value-based interaction and that we stand for what we care about in those relationships instead of one of criticism and missed expectations. I think we're missing the boat.
Fantastic.
Wow. I mean, I don't know what else can be said. I think you just, that's what we call in the industry a mic drop there, Neil. So, hey, if you want to learn more about Liberty University and the pioneering approach that they have to student athletes and collegiate athletics, go to liberty.edu. And if you want to learn more about Dr. Royer and Inner Armour and the kinds of things that they're doing, not only with student athletes, but professional sports teams and ordinary people and everybody in between, go to forgeinnerarmor.com.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, guys.
This has been the Inner Armour Podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Would you please follow or subscribe and make sure to leave us a review or comment. You can learn more about Inner Armour, Dr. Royer, and how to perform at your potential by going to forgeinnerarmor.com.